Right now, as we learn any new information, at least hope that those tourists are able to get to their final destinations tonight, to their hotels. Evacuations affecting not just the tourists, but obviously the people who live in and around New York City. Public transport through that area has at least been diverted. We have heard that subways are continuing to run underground there. I want to get to my colleague, our Chief Justice correspondent, Pete Williams, who's joining us live tonight at roughly 12:20 now Eastern Time in Times Square, where this is taking place. And Pete, if we can roll back the clock, almost 6 hours, roughly 6:30, when the first calls about this were heard, when the first witness told an officer that there was a car or an SUV that appeared to be smoldering or smelled like smoke. From that moment forward, take us into the investigation. Who gets called? How does it work? And what's the progression?
Okay, I'll do that in just a second, Peter, but let me just pass on a bit of new information here. What's happening, as you just heard in the live report from Times Square, is that the robot is now going through various parts of the car. The robot is, and the investigators are able to now begin to peel back the layers of whatever the heck it is in this car. One of the things apparently that they were concerned about was a metal box that there was a thought might have been a detonator, might have been an actuator somehow for the bomb. I'm told by a senior official here that that box was found empty. So that piece of it they have now set aside, and I think that's what we're going to see now for the next several hours as they try to piece by piece go through this device, if in fact it is a device, and figure out what exactly was here, what was it meant to do, how was it supposed to work if in fact it was a bomb. But to answer your question now, yes, it has been about 6 hours, and it may be 6 hours more before we have any really good answers about what this thing was. But it starts with an eyewitness report and a mounted policeman from New York, and anyone who's been in Times Square has seen these New York policemen that are on horseback. They received a report about smoke and possibly a flash coming out of this car. They did the natural thing, which is to call the fire department. The fire department responded. They looked inside, saw propane tanks, and they immediately called the New York City bomb squad. Now, at that point, the New York City folks activate what's known, and many big cities have these, what are called joint terrorism task forces. They consist of state, federal, local agents. New York City probably has the best joint terrorism task force in the country, well experienced at this, and an extremely competent bomb squad. So they now focus their attention on the car itself and how to minimize any potential danger. At the same time, obviously, they're trying to preserve any evidence that they can from the car itself. So the car itself is going to be a mother lode of evidence in this case, because they'll be able to look at the car, they'll be able to trace the car, they'll be able to figure out when the car was purchased, go back all through that. They've got license plates, they'll get fingerprints, there'll be other forensic information, possibly hairs, fibers, all those things that they'll try to get out of the car, which, as Evan Coleman was pointing out earlier, normally a bomber expects all of that to be consumed in the explosion. Sure. Although, you know, we know from the Oklahoma City bombing that sometimes that is not all the case, that it was an axle that was found on the ground outside the bombing building that had a vehicle identification number on it that allowed them to trace it back. But in this case, you have the whole car, and you have all the tales that car may tell. Now, you've also got eyewitnesses that the police will be interviewing, trying to find people who were in the area at the time, see what they saw, get descriptions from them, and then you have this incredible resource of the cameras, and you can triangulate them by locking them together in time, and then you can sort of get almost a three-dimensional picture of what was going on, and try to trace the car through other cameras. Not only the cameras traced on Times Square, but if there are other cameras in the neighborhood, begin to get a picture of where the car came from and trace the movements of the car back in time as far as possible. So lots and lots of forensic detail that they can follow, and indeed already have started to follow.
And Pete, again, I want to get back to you very quickly, if you can, so that you can repeat the newest information that you're hearing from your law enforcement sources, specifically about the robot now going through parts of the car, peeling back the layers as you describe it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and this metal box to which you were referring, what their concern was and what they found?
No, because I don't know much more about it than what I was just told, other than there was some concern about a box inside the car. They were very concerned about what that thing was. Could that thing have held a detonator that would in turn kick off the propane and the gasoline? So my assumption based on that, Peter, is that they would obviously start with the subject of their greatest concern. And so you would assume that there's some supposition, some conjecture that perhaps that box, which they couldn't see into, might have held something that would be an important component in initiating an explosion. They've gotten that box out, they've opened it up, they looked inside, it's empty. So that I think they're breathing a little bit of sigh of relief there as they now begin to look through and figure out, how is this thing supposed to work?
Yeah, well, that does it. I appreciate you reiterating that. I think that's the most important point there, is that this is one of their primary concerns, this metal box where they had some suspicion inside of which they might find a detonator. Instead, it was empty. Of course, too early, even at this hour, which is frankly rather late for the people in New York's Times Square to make any judgments. They're going to take their time and slowly process that vehicle as they consider their investigation of that area to make sure there are no other secondary devices. Pete Williams will stay with us. Again, back out live now to Tommy Yamas from WNBC.